Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. In this episode, we have some true horror stories from national parks. My name is Joseph, and I'm from the Utah town of Orem. I've been running cross-country since high school. Nothing beats the feeling of pure relaxation that a long run provides, and I swear by it as the best anti-anxiety medication available. But last year, I went on a run in nearby Slate Canyon that was far from relaxing, and it forever changed the way I viewed the natural world. On October 10, 2020, I made the decision to spend my Saturday running the Slate Canyon Trail. It's one of my favorite cross-country routes, with plenty of sloping hills and great views of the canyon. And, because the loop is approximately 8.5 miles long, running from my house to the trail and back is equivalent to a safe 10-mile run for me. So it's my go-to for a good long run. Like many other runners, I run with a phone app and enjoy listening to music. When I run, I'm constantly changing up my playlist to see which songs give me the most energy. So I always have my phone with me, and it also allows me to take photos of interesting things I see on the trail. So, about 6 miles into this run, I notice a pair of what appeared to be bobcats ahead of me on the trail. Excellent photo opportunity. Right? So I took out my phone, knelt, and began zooming in to get a better picture as I looked at them through my phone screen. I began to notice that these little critters did not resemble any bobcats I'd ever seen before. I take a few pictures and begin to get closer to them. When I hear a deep feline growl from behind me, the little bobcats scatter and I turn around to see an actual cougar emerge from the brush at the trail's edge. They weren't bobcats I'd photographed, they were cougar kittens, and I'd gotten in between them and their mother by mistake, and Mama was furious. She's got her ears back, bounding towards me and slamming these massive paws on the ground, hissing the whole time. It was a terrifying demonstration of raw power. I don't think we realize how ripped animals are until we get up close and personal with them. I remember being taught as a child that if you come into contact with an animal like that, you should exaggerate your size and make loud noises, so the predator thinks you're more trouble than you're worth. That is precisely what I did. I began yelling at the top of my lungs and flailing my arms in the air. I remember yelling curse words at her as if it were going to make a difference, as if this 140 pounds cougar mama was going to say, "Well, I never such awful language, I shall refrain from eating your face now, sir." Good morning to you. At first, my little freak-out appears to have worked, and the cougar mom backs off for a few meters to ensure her cubs are safe. I feel a huge wave of relief wash over me, and I find myself pulling out my phone to text someone, call someone, or really anything I just needed to share such a hair-raising encounter with someone. But then I see Cougar Mama doubling back, tearing out of the brush and back up the trail at me. By this point, I'm practically begging her to leave me alone as I slide my phone back into my pocket and start making myself big again. That was probably the most terrifying aspect. The only way I'd been taught to protect myself in such situations was rapidly failing me. I screamed louder and waved my arms faster, but the cougar mother seemed less and less intimidated by me, and as I worked my way backwards along the trail, the cougar got closer and closer, following me the entire way. I knew she just wanted to keep me away from her babies, but how far she was willing to go both literally and metaphorically to ensure their safety was the burning question. I knew she was looking to mess me up so the big, scary human wouldn't ever creep towards her babies again, and I'm not sure I blamed her. I must have appeared very sly, slinking towards their children with that strange shiny thing in my hand, but enough victim blaming. After a while, I began to regain some of my senses and noticed that the ground I was walking on was covered in loose rock. In the end, I realized I could have been down, grabbed one, and tossed it at the cougar mama, which is exactly what I did. But it took me a long time to muster the courage to do so seriously. I knew if I crouched, if I made myself small, Mama would rush me, so I had to put a little space between us so I could buy myself some time to crouch, but every time I tried, Mama would just bound along the trail kicking up dust and hissing like a wildcat, which I suppose is exactly what she was. I thought, this is it, she's going to pounce and it's going to hurt really, really bad. Grazing for that kind of pain when she got within about 5 or 6 feet of me. But I was certain that the injuries would be permanent and life-changing. They were the most horrifyingly terrifying few moments of my life, dude. I'll never forget them, I'm sure of it. They'll be with me for the rest of my life. She must have only been following me for a couple of minutes at most. We didn't make it very far down the trail together, but my god did it feel like an eternity. Like there was a time when I legit thought she was going to follow me completely off the trail, just waiting for me to turn my back or... But, as I previously stated, I eventually found the perfect window to crouch down, grab a rock, and hurl it at her. I missed, but the rock must have smacked against another as it landed just to the side of her, because this awesome big cracking sound had her running for cover immediately, and that time she didn't turn back around. But I wasn't out of the woods yet, because the entire trail is in a loop, and because of the direction the cougar mama had pushed me back, I had to huff and puff. My uncles are all big gun guys, and as much as I've never been into that, man, I wish I had one on that trail that day, once I'm adequately armed and ready to defend myself. I begin to move forward, terrified. I'm going to be ambushed, and who knows what will happen. Perhaps there is even a cougar papa. But all I come across are these two hikers going in opposite directions. When I asked if they'd seen a cougar, they all said no, and I asked why. Perhaps they thought I was joking. I had to tell them the whole story. Just to make sure they believe me, the guy reassured me that cougars rarely attack people, so I must have done something really bad to enrage her. But, in any case, I got off that trail unscathed, returned home, and told my parents about it. It makes for a terrifying story, which I probably tell more often than I should. But in God's name, I want it to happen again. No, it does not. In a million years, never. For whatever it's worth, keep your distance from cougars and their kittens. The Everglades are one of my favorite places on the planet. Many people respond by saying that you don't seem to have visited many places. But, contrary to popular belief, I've visited a wide range of locations. I spent 15 years in the United States Navy and visited nearly every country with a coastline, and I didn't waste my shore leave twiddling my thumbs. I've traveled the world, and I can tell you that there is no place like the Everglades in Florida. The Glades manage to be both serene and wild at the same time. I find it uplifting to see how alive it is, but I'm also terrified of all the hidden dangers. It hides whether it's snakes, gators, brown recluse, spiders or fire ants, and if you step in the wrong place or disrespect the habitat, you'll be lucky to escape with all your limbs intact. I've had close encounters with all of the aforementioned, but the devil you don't know is always preferable to the devil you do. And it stands to reason that my most terrifying experiences in the Glades have been with things I can't fully explain. I'm not going to start telling you stories about skunk apes or Bigfoot. None of that holds water with me. Don't misunderstand me. I like to keep my mind open, but not so much that my brain falls out. But, twice now, things have happened while I've been fishing or hiking that have left me shaken, and I'm not easily scared. Back about 10 or 15 years ago, when I had my boat, I would take her out into the Glades as much as I could to save money on the old grocery bill by bringing back snapper, sea trout, redfish, and even bass or bluegill. On a good day, fishing in the Glades is as close to heaven as you're likely to get, as long as you don't cast off near the gators. However, my enjoyment of the beautiful scenery around me was somewhat overshadowed by my fear of whatever was below me, because I've seen some big old fish in my time, some pretty giant gar and bass that have smashed local records, but whatever rubbed up against my boat that evening. It had to be bigger than them all. I didn't even realize anything was wrong until it nudged my boat out of the way. Things will nudge up against your underside from curiosity or stupidity every now and then, but nothing I'd ever seen before had the size or strength to actually move me. When it dawned on me how massive this thing had to be, I turned to get a better look at it, but by then it had sunk back into the murkier waters. But believe me, I've been fishing my entire life and can tell how big a fish is by the ripples it makes on the surface of the water. And it had to be at least 7 to 8 feet long. But it was the feeling in the pit of my stomach that really clued me in on the nature of this thing. I've only gotten it once before, when I was too close to a cottonmouth or an expectant mama gator. It's this awful primal fear that you think we inherited from our monkey ancestors. There's no feeling like it in the world, sir. And having had time to think about it, I believe it could have been some kind of catfish. I've heard about fishermen down in South America pulling catfish out of the water that are easily the size of a full-grown man. But the fact remains that I have no idea what that thing is, only that it made me fear God. I was out hiking in Big Cypress for the second time, when I was still married. After a particularly heated argument with my ex-wife, tempers flared, some regrettable things were said, and a coffee cup was thrown at my head. So I gathered my hiking gear and a fifth of a Jack Daniels. I had hidden in the garage and driven out the large cypress from my Naples home. Approximately an hour into the hike, I nearly drank the entire bottle of Jack Daniels, and I was probably a little tipsy. I just kept walking and walking, not caring which way I was going because anywhere seemed better than home at the time. So I'm still walking, and what went in had to come out eventually. So I take a few steps off the trail to find a place to pee. Then, as I'm draining the main vein, I'm looking through all of that green. I was so used to seeing something unfamiliar, when I noticed the unmistakable pattern of wooden paneling. I've never seen a structure so far out in the glades. So my curiosity got the best of me, and I wandered through the trees, eventually arriving at what turned out to be an old house. It didn't appear to have been lived in for a long time, but it was still standing craftsmanship to be proud of since I assumed it had been abandoned. I didn't see any harm in looking around the inside, but it wasn't the best idea I'd ever had. The inside was crammed with various types of scrap metal. Almost every wall in every room and corridor was lined with scrap metal of such variety that I couldn't possibly name it all. I saw car parts, old knives and forks, and any other type of scrap metal you could think of. And it was all over this old house. And speaking of the walls, they were all covered in drawings, almost like a child would do, but a little too good to be a child, you know what I mean. The pictures were all black and white, as if done with a grease stick or something. I couldn't understand what the word said, but the pictures were clear. They depicted happy children playing in flower beds, but the way they were drawn made them appear extremely creepy. Then I notice a picture frame on the filthy old mantel. The photograph inside was of what appeared to be a family, mom and dad, each with a hand on each of their children's shoulders. Only the mom and dad's faces are scratched out and only the little kid's face is visible before I have time to piece anything together. A dog barking in the distance has nearly scared me to death. The hound's yaps are becoming increasingly loud, and it probably takes me a little longer than it should to realize that the abandoned house I was exploring wasn't really abandoned at all. And whether or not they were, the kid in the picture is debatable, but I had no intention of meeting them either way. At first glance, the location appeared to be nothing more than a dump, graffitied and moldy, used for trash disposal. But I remember that terrifying moment when I realized there was a method to the madness, that whoever called this place home had it exactly the way they liked it, and that only a seriously messed up person could have felt at home in a place like that. As I previously stated, I did not remain. I ran back out the way I came in on the trail, not stopping until I was back somewhere I recognized. I knew I shouldn't have driven my truck given my condition, but for one of the few times in my life, I didn't want to be in the Everglades. I know it sounds like I'm blowing my own horn, but I just have a natural fear of dangerous predators. I guess it comes from growing up in South Florida, and believe me, whoever was returning to that house terrified me more than all the gators and cottonmouths combined, and I can't imagine who could be living out there miles from anywhere in such creepy places. That is to say, You should all respect the Everglades more, as well as all of our national parks and green spaces, because they are not only some of the last wild and beautiful places in our ever-changing country. It's because the Everglades and other similar areas are home to more than just some pretty dangerous and scary animals. It's because they're also home to some pretty terrifying people. And I know which one. I'm not taking any chances with me and my friend Sonia used to be huge into mountain biking, and one of our favorite places to ride was here in Washington State's Cascade foothills. Sonia was a huge character in the Seattle biking community, and I was fortunate enough to have them join me a few times a year on a drive out to North Bend, right at the base of the foothills. Fans of David Lynch may be familiar with North Bend because it is where some of the Twin Peaks was filmed, and you may notice something oddly familiar while driving around. It's as if the Lynch show lynched the town itself. He and Sonia used to say that we parked the car and then drove right up into the hills and back before stuffing our faces with carnitas at taco time. And did you really feel like you deserved that meal? Those hills might be rough, but they sure make for some great biking. But, as much as I enjoy the Cascades, I haven't been up there in a few years and don't see myself returning anytime soon. You'll understand why by the end of this story. So, on this particular Saturday in May of 2018, Sonia and I drove out to North Bend for one of our first bike rides of the summer. I was so excited to be back biking because, unless you enjoy being soaked, frozen, and battered by gale force winds, biking in coastal Washington are pretty much off the table during the winter and early spring. The first couple of hours fly by and we're having a great time just burning off all the stress of the working week and soaking up all of nature's goodness. We've been at it for a few hours, so we're just meandering along an easier section of the bike track, taking a break. And then I hear this strange growling sound from behind me. I'd never seen anything like it before, so I didn't know if it was a mountain lion until I looked over my shoulder and saw it just following us up the track. Sonia must have heard something because they both slow down and look over their shoulders instead of speeding up and trying to make a break for it. Sonia comes to a complete stop on the track, gets off their bike, and then turns it sideways to create a barrier between them and a potential attacker. It was kind of genius, like I had no idea. They just know what to do during something like that, and my god, didn't impress me much. Sonia then tells me to do the same as them, then start yelling really loudly so the cougar will get scared and run away. I was more scared than scared at the time, but I did as they said anyway, and the cougar reacted. Sure, but no matter how loud we yelled, it just seemed to get closer and closer to us, and even throwing rocks didn't seem to deter it from charging us. Sonia grabs their bike, lifts it slightly off the ground, and shoves the frame rate of the cougar, just as the thing is about to start clawing at them. They hit it so hard that it lost its balance, backed off, and ran into the trees. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. Sonia had fought off a real cougar, and they'd saved my life and our lives, but it wouldn't be the last time. Sonia would save my life that day, and the second time wasn't nearly as joyful. We're breathing a collective sigh of relief, still a little stunned by what had just occurred. I was just telling Sonia how cool they were battling that cougar off of us like some superhero or something, but all they care about is getting out of there before that thing decides to come back, which sounded like the best idea ever. I followed Sonia back to my bike and we started riding back down the trail. I watch as they move slightly ahead of me, and then something slams into me from behind, knocking me off my bike. I don't have to look it up to figure out what it is. Sonia's screams tell me everything. I needed to know that mountain lion had just hid off the trail out of sight and waited for us to turn our backs. It was classic ambush predator behavior, and we were foolish to give it our backs. We just wanted to get back home. All we wanted was our real ride of the summer, not to be playing gladiators with big cats, but please understand what it felt like when the thing locked its jaws around my skull. As I previously stated, I was aware of what was going on. It was all terrifyingly clear, and strangely, I accepted it. The mountain lion's teeth were going to crush my skull. I could probably crush rocks if they needed to, but then everything would turn black, and there would be no way out, no point in trying. Shirley had lost the game. The only thing I didn't want Sonia to witness was my death. In any case, not like that. I don't think there's a nicer way to watch a friend you've known for more than 5 years die, but having their skull crushed has to be one of the worst. So I just remember screaming at them to get back on their bikes and leave if they stayed and tried to help me. They are also injured. And, as I said in that strange moment of clarity, better just one of us die than both of us die. That's precisely what she did. I mean, I didn't see it, but Sonia got back on her bike and started riding down the trail, presumably thinking she could get help once she was a safe distance away. Meanwhile, my head is still locked in the teeth of that mountain lion, and I'm expecting that sickening crunch to begin as I feel my own head coming apart and that thing's jaws, its jaws, its jaws, its jaws, its jaws, its jaws, its jaws. Suddenly, the pressure around my head began to dissipate and then vanished entirely. I couldn't immediately open my eyes. The only thing that jolted me back into action was hearing a blood-curdling scream coming from up the track. Scream, Sonia. It's a sound that has stayed with me for a long time. Following this horrifying ear-splitting screech as the mountain lion tore them from her bike and began tearing into them. As blood dripped down my scalp and onto my face, I did everything I could to find my feet. I had to wipe it from my eyes in order to see my bike, which I intended to throw at the mountain lion in order to get it off of Sonia before it did any serious damage. But I wasn't quick enough. Sonia had gone silent by the time I had my bike in hand, and the mountain lion had sunk its teeth into their shoulder and began dragging them off into the woods. It had completely lost interest in me, and was now entirely focused on Sonia. So you get her somewhere safe so I can see her. I apologize. I can't even complete that sentence. The only way I'll be able to finish this is to talk about them. They saved my life not once, but twice that day. After witnessing them fight off a mountain lion with nothing more than a bicycle, I was willing to die so that they could live. They were 32 years old. That thing that just let me go and attack Sonia could still have had a family or something. Why? It had me in its mouth, and it had finished its meal. So why did it allow me to pursue my fleeing friend? Isn't it like some sick joke? Just as I was about to accept the deal. A life for a life, mine for Sonia's. God just changes the deal as if you're completely correct. There is something worse than death. So let's take that route instead. Even when it was explained to me that pursuing a fleeing prey was just coded into the big cat's instincts. It's as if the information simply wouldn't compute. I just saw everything. Some heinous cosmic joke that destroyed my mental health and drove me to the brink of insanity when I was discovered by the EMTs. I was taken to the hospital and had to stay for a few days while doctors performed tests on my head injury to rule out brain trauma. I was visited by a sheriff or something while I was there. I wish I could remember who it was, but I was so out of it from the whole ordeal and the morphine that I couldn't remember anything. This guy tells me that we did everything correctly and that there was something wrong with that mountain lion, which is a nice way of saying that we were screwed regardless. It was the first death caused by a mountain lion attack in that area in 94 years, demonstrating how rare they are. And, yes, it was tracked down and killed by forest rangers or whoever it was. As I lay in that hospital bed, it was the only thing that felt like justice. I know that sounds cruel, and I assure you that I am an animal lover, but I make no apologies for being content. When I heard the news, my family and a few friends came to see me, but the people I most wanted to see were Sonia's loved ones. I wanted to emphasize that they had saved my life twice that day, that they were the bravest people I had ever met, and that every day of the rest of my life would be a tribute to them and a celebration of their life. I know it was easier for Sonia's family because they told me, and it was certainly easier for me. It's easier to tell myself that I'm still walking and talking, breathing and loving, and laughing because of Sonia J. Brooks. Sonia founded Friends on Bikes to create a community for women of color who enjoy riding bicycles. Sonia served on the board of directors of Boston's Bikes, Not Bombs organization, which provided bikes to underprivileged children in economically disadvantaged areas. Sonia, who went above and beyond to make the biking community more welcoming and safe for women, trans, and non-binary cyclists of color. Sonia, who has created such a network of love and community that when they learned about my medical bills, they set up a GoFundMe page to assist me in paying them. Hearing that news set me off all over again, just when I thought I'd cried all the tears I could. Sonia was a strong, intelligent, kind, and generous woman who was also incredibly funny. I miss them every day and will for the rest of my life. What am I supposed to say? Sonia's sacrificed life has enabled me to. Colin Nathaniel Scott, a year-old from Portland, Oregon, was visiting Yellowstone National Park with members of his close family in June of 2016. Colin had recently made his mother and father extremely proud by graduating from Pacific University as the top student in his program. So we can only imagine how much steam Colin had to expel, and we can all agree that such a hard-working young man deserved a relaxing, fun-filled summer vacation. Colin and his sister Sable, on the other hand, decided to visit the Norris Geyser Basin on Tuesday, June 7th. It was named after Philip S. W. Norris, Yellowstone's second superintendent. The Norris Geyser Basin is the most active and oldest of Yellowstone's thermal springs. Water temperatures have been known to reach over 450 degrees Fahrenheit at just 300 meters below the surface, making the area a fascinating, albeit dangerous, geological marvel. Although the deeper waters can reach extremely hot temperatures, the surface waters of many hot springs are cool enough for people to swim in, and swimming in hot springs around Yellowstone and elsewhere has always been a popular activity with more adventurous visitors. So much so that it's earned the moniker hot potting if the excitement isn't without risk. In fact, leaving the designated trails around the basin is strongly discouraged. These erupting springs can spray boiling water for a long distance, inflict horrific burns, and for whatever reason, Colin and his sister wandered off the designated route that day. Whether it was to find a hot pot location or simply to get a better look at the geysers, we don't know for sure. But the fact remains that Colin and his sister got up close and personal with one of the geysers. This leads us to believe that the waters of this particular thermal spring were not particularly hot, as the siblings would not have approached at all. If the waters were churning or boiling, the water must have appeared to be perfectly safe, an ideal location for a spot of hot potting. Many have speculated that this is exactly what the siblings were hoping for and had walked out to the basin intent on swimming. Colin's sister, on the other hand, insists that her brother simply slipped and fell into the spring and that there was no horseplay or prohibited activity other than stepping off the trail. The motivations are irrelevant at this point because, whether intentional or unintentional, Colin is now in the water, which they must have previously assumed to be relatively safe and of tepid temperature. So we can only imagine Colin's sister's shock and horror as she watched her brother emerge from the deep thermal waters before letting out a blood-curdling scream. The water did not appear to be hot at all. In fact, there was very little steam rising from the surface. But, If that was the case, why was Colin screaming in pain? What was causing his skin to turn red as he was being boiled alive? Why was his hair turning shriveled? Why was his skin blistering? Sister knew she couldn't help her brother because she'd be burned as well. But she didn't have anything long enough to throw at him to drag him out. All she could do was yell at him, begging him to swim to the edge and save himself. But her cries were drowned out by Colin's screams. She took out her cell phone, only to discover that she had no signal, no way of contacting anyone, and no way of calling for help. Colin's yelps of pain subsided, and he began to tire. His sister could only run back to the nearby Giza Basin Museum for assistance. It was there that she met Ranger Rosa Presser, who then radioed the Yellowstone Communications Center to request immediate assistance. Rick Lee, a Norris Interpretive Ranger, and George Brecht, a Canyon Ranger, were the first to arrive at the hot spring where the incident occurred. Early on, Range noticed a wallet and a flip-flop floating on the surface of one particular spring, with matching flip-flops stuck in the mud at its edge. Colin, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found, and only when he probed the pool with a large wooden stick. Despite his best efforts, Ranger Lee was unable to bring what was undoubtedly Colin's dead body to the surface of the spring, and because the area was so dangerous, it wasn't long before Ranger Command ordered them to leave for their own safety. Additional rescue personnel were dispatched to the scene, but due to numerous safety concerns involving a lightning storm and the general dangers of navigating in a thermal basin, they were unable to arrive. The rescuers arrived at the hot spring around 8 p.m. several hours after the incident occurred. Only the badly burned upper torso of a male floating on the surface of the pool was seen by team leader Phil Stroll and Yellowstone Search and Rescue member Doug Matteson. The hot spring had managed to almost completely dismember Colin's body in just a few hours, but how on earth could that be done with just hot water? The body was no longer visible in the hot spring the next morning, according to Ranger Stroll, who stated that there were no signs that the body had been removed by another human or animal due to the lack of drag marks along the pool's edges. The waters were tested again, but there was no sign of any human remains in the hot springs this time. The events were a complete mystery until one member of the Yellowstone staff heard about it and offered some wise, but terrifying, advice that might just help us understand the strange nature of Colin's death. This expert explained that the park's geysers and springs can be extremely acidic at times. This is due to the fact that they are fed by thermal waters that originate deep beneath the Earth's surface and pick up sulfuric acid as it rises to the surface. Subterranean microorganisms that break down hydrogen sulfide, rocks, and soil as part of their feeding mechanism produce sulfuric acid. If Colin had known what to look for, he would never have approached that one hot spring with its overly cloudy waters and rotten egg odor. However, he had no way of knowing that the spring he was approaching, the one he would inadvertently fall into, was a pure chemical death trap. Although what happened was clearly a tragic accident, our hearts go out to the Scott family. Both Colin and Sable clearly ignored numerous warning signs on their way to the spring. However, due to the calm appearance of the water, the brother and sister simply ignored the signs and judged the spring safe to approach. Yellowstone representatives made it clear that such signage is there for a reason and urged visitors to be more cautious when visiting such obviously hazardous areas of the park because there are always those unknown unknowns. We don't know things like how warm-looking hot spring, perfect for a summer day dip, could actually be full of deadly corrosive sulfuric acid. Lauren Bonner, a year old, took his 18-year-old girlfriend, Jolie Callan, on a day trip to the Pinhole National Recreation Trail in the national park on August 30, 2015. Alabama was nestled in the Appalachian Mountains to the south. The Pinhole Trail winds its way through Georgia and Alabama, attracting hikers, bikers, and naturalists of all kinds. Under any other circumstances, a couple's hike through such a beautiful natural wilderness would be a romantic occasion. But, unbeknownst to one of them, a heinous violent attack was about to change both of their lives forever. Lauren once described his life as basically a bad pop-punk album. He and Jolie had a passionate relationship that had all the hallmarks of adolescent love. It was heavenly at its best. At its worst, however, it was heartbreaking. And, unfortunately for Lauren, it was at its worst during that particular weekend. Lauren posted 49 pictures of himself and Jolie having spent the entire weekend together on his Instagram account at the end of August, and the final 4 pictures posted were all from the hike that day, and one she held a dog with her back to the camera, while in the next, she appeared to be taking a picture of a cloudy mountaintop while wearing her maroon Walked To t-shirt. It was a peaceful and serene moment shared by 2 young lovers, but it was about to be shattered by a single gunshot. Jolie collapsed in front of her smoking bear claw, blood pouring from a wound in the back of her skull. 22 items were stolen. Lauren was in his grip, and she was said to utter just 2 shaky words as she lay dying. "I apologize." A 911 dispatcher at the Clay County Sheriff's Office received a call shortly after from a young man who claimed to have shot his girlfriend. Lauren appeared to be in a state of shock. Lauren claims that he shot Jolie in the back of the head and once between the eyes to ensure her death, ostensibly because he didn't want her to suffer. Lauren tells the dispatcher that he had to push his girlfriend's limp, bleeding body off the cliff because the sight of her limp, bleeding body on the ground before him was too much for him. She was standing on the edge of what would turn out to be a 40-foot drop. Jolie's body was already in a bad way after 2 gunshots to the head, but the 40-foot fall, which snagged on rocks the entire way down, did catastrophic damage to her body. When police arrived on the scene, they discovered Jolie's body and a large amount of blood at the top of the cliff, exactly where Lauren claimed she was shot. Lauren was then handcuffed and taken to jail after the murder weapon was safely recovered from him. In November 2015, his case was assigned to a Clay County grand jury. Lawrence's attorneys argued in the initial court filings that he might have Asperger's syndrome and asked the judge to consider that fact before making a decision on legal proceedings. Lauren was then granted youth offender status in May 2016, resulting in a media blackout of the trial and a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. Thankfully, authorities saw the light and revoked the privilege. Only a month later, Lawrence's defense chose to paint a rather twisted version of that day's events. They claim their client and his girlfriend made a pact to end their lives together by jumping off the Pin Hotel cliffs hand in hand so they could be together in eternity. However, when it came time to do it, Lauren claimed that Jolie said she was too scared to jump and asked him to shoot her before he did. Lauren then agreed to her request, but she was overcome with guilt and terror. Once he'd shot her, he couldn't bring himself to keep his end of the bargain, but this claim was dismissed by the prosecution, who correctly countered that Jolie was a young woman with everything to live for, and while she had gone through some difficult times over the years, they were not unlike those experienced by almost every teenage girl. The jury, according to Jolie's father, Michael Joe Callan, saw the young man for what he was, a violent, possessive, highly disturbed person who was a clear and present threat to himself and those around him at a time when accusations of misogyny are cheapened by the media. Julie's murder is a stark and heinous example of this. Lauren Boehner saw his girlfriend as an object that couldn't exist without him. If he couldn't have her, no one could. That is by far the most self-centered sentiment imaginable. Not long after Carlin's death, comments in various languages began to appear on both her and Brunner's Instagram accounts. Rest in peace, my friend. You poor girl, hosted the user Breezy B. Another retaliated. He'll get what he deserves, which is to rot in prison for the rest of his meaningless life. Lauren was sentenced to 52 years in prison at his sentencing hearing on July 13, 2017. His defense team condemns such a harsh sentence, citing his young age, but I believe we can all rest easy knowing that the perpetrator of such a heinous selfish crime is in prison, and for a long, long time. On October 8, 1976, Trenny Gibson, 16, left Bearden High School in Knoxville, Tennessee on a field trip with nearly 40 of her classmates. The supervising adult horticulture teacher, Wayne Dunlap, had essentially surprised his students with the trip, as they didn't even know they were going anywhere until confronted with a gassed-up school bus with Mr. Dunlap as the only adult chaperone. After about an hour, the bus pulled into a parking lot near Clingman Stone, a gently sloping mountain, and the students set out on the 2-mile hike along the Forney Ridge Trail to Andrews, Bald Mountain. While hiking, the students separated into smaller groups or cliques that dotted the length of the trail, and Trenny walked the trail alongside a young man named Robert Simpson, who was a trusted friend of her brother. Around 1:30 p.m., the students stopped at the trailside to eat some quick brown bag lunches. Trenny and Robert were seen eating together, with a trainee dressed in Robert's jacket. However, the two kids were not together when the group hiked back, as Robert claims he was off tracking a bear around 3 o'clock. Training was spotted hiking alongside another group of students who were only about half a mile from the parking lot in the school bus. They later admitted that they were exhausted from the day's hike and stopped to rest before the final half-mile training, but they were in no mood to rest and insisted on continuing for the final stretch. So the group split up, and everyone remembers seeing her walking down the trail toward the parking lot. However, when the group of resting students returned to the parking lot about a half hour later, they discovered that Training was nowhere to be found. Mr. Dunlap's roll call soon discovered that all but one of his students, Trenny Gibson, were present, and when he discovered that she had apparently gone missing with only a short stretch of the trail to go, he began to panic. Training had vanished right in front of her classmates' eyes, and he just knew something terrible was to blame. Police and Forest Service personnel launched a massive search that covered more than 30 square miles of the Great Smokies, but Trenny Gibson was nowhere to be found that afternoon. It was very foggy when Training went missing, so she could easily have gotten lost after she stepped off the trail. So it was speculated for a while that she simply walked off the trail to use the restroom or something, then got herself turned around. However, a partially open can of beer and 3 cigarette butts were later discovered near the spot where Trainee stepped off Thorny Ridge Trail. However, none of the other students admitted to bringing beer on the trip. This put the investigators in a bind. The buttocks and beer could be evidence of a stranger lurking nearby, but a guilty student would be unlikely to admit bringing such contraband with them. Details like this muddied the investigation from the start, complicating an already difficult process. Even more difficult, K9 units from a local search and rescue unit discovered that many of their dogs were picking up trainees sent to a section of Thorny Ridge where the Appalachian Trail intersected. They followed her scent trail to the base of the Klingon's Dome observation tower, then for nearly 2 miles through dense patches of woodland before reaching a road. This is where the scent trail ended, and it was close to where cigarette butts of the same brand as those found back where Trainee was banished were discovered. It was now clear to police that the girl had been led a long distance, either deceptively or forcefully, before being loaded into a waiting vehicle. It was not a chance crime. This had been meticulously planned and horrifyingly well executed. Not only that, but the public was shocked to learn that whoever kidnapped Trenny may have kept her prisoner in the immediate vicinity for some time before transporting her. Later on, as her classmates passed her on the trail, Training could have had a knife to her throat or a hand over her mouth, so close but so far from salvation. With this terrifying thought in mind, the trainee's family publicly announced their suspicions about one of the trainee's classmates, Kelvin Bowman. This suspicion was rooted in the fact that just a few months prior, Kelvin had actually tried to force his way into the Gibson home and was only deterred when Trainee's mother shot him in the foot with a small caliber revolver. Kelvin served a measly 6 months in a juvenile correctional facility, but it apparently vowed to murder Training once he was freed after his sentence. He was freed from the facility and returned to Beard in high school and some students were adamant that they saw a car that looked a lot like Kelvin's following the bus that day, but the teacher, Mr. Dunlap, insists that there was no one following them on the journey out to the trail and that if there was, he would have surely noticed. The principal of Beard and High also testified that Kelvin was attending classes all day and wouldn't have been able to make it there and back in the time frame suggested by his accusers. Although he was not formally charged in connection with the disappearance of the trainees, Kelvin was arrested in 1978, and accused of indecently assaulting a woman in her own apartment. As a result, he was found guilty of third-degree criminal conduct and has long been regarded as the prime suspect in this case. However, Kelvin is not the only suspect in the case, and the suspicion turned to Robert Simpson, a supposedly trusted friend of her brother's with whom she had lunch that day. Following her disappearance, A number of people reported seeing Trainee's comb, which she always carried in her right hip pocket of her jeans, on the dashboard of Robert's car. But the most concerning aspect is that while Trainee's parents were helping in the search for her, Robert paid a visit to the Gibson home and made some strange remarks to Trainee's sister, saying that if Kelvin Bowman had kidnapped Trainee, she didn't stand a chance and was dead for certain, but she could also have run off with some horny hitchhiker. It was also difficult to account for Robert's whereabouts after he became separated from training at Andrews Bald, but it doesn't sound like investigators ever considered him to be a serious suspect. Despite multiple searches of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, no trace of Training has ever been found, and it appears that Trainee's disappearance will remain yet another case of a person simply vanishing while visiting one of this country's great national parks. Hello there, friends. Thank you for listening. Please click the notification bell to be notified of any future narrations.